Today I'm starting a 3-part series all about pressure canning, Pressure Canning 101. And here today in part 1, we're going to talk about which pressure canner might be right for you. Then in part 2, we're going to talk about the tools and supplies that you need when you do decide to start pressure canning. And then part 3, we're going to actually pressure can a low-acid food. Hi, sweet friends. If you're new here, I'm Mary from Mary's Nest and author of the Modern Pioneer Cookbook and the Modern Pioneer Pantry. And I'd like to welcome you to my kitchen. Now, the first thing I want to clarify is that we're talking about pressure canners. We're not talking about pressure cookers, and they are different. A common pressure cooker that's out there today is called the Instant Pot, and there are a lot of ones that are similar to that as well, and that's for pressure cooking. But a pressure cooker cannot be used to pressure can. Now, I don't want to confuse you, but it is important to know that some pressure canners can also be used as pressure cookers. So when you're shopping for a pressure canner, the box may say pressure canner and cooker. So I hope that's not too confusing to you, do you? But today what we're going to focus on is what type of pressure canner may be right for you. And just as a little side note before we get started, if you hear a little chomping in the background, it's because my supervisor is here with me today, otherwise known as my sweet dog, Indy, who decided that this was a good time to get a little chew bone and start chewing on it. So you may hear a little chomping, but I love him so much and he's a delight to have. And as they say, the show must go on. Now, depending on when you're watching this, my new book, The Modern Pioneer Pantry, may be available for pre-order or it may already be out. It's going to come out in August. And the reason that I'm sharing that with you is because in Chapter 4 of the Modern Pioneer Pantry, I have a section all about pressure canning. And in that section will be a QR code where you'll be able to watch this series of pressure canning videos. Now, this is the beginning of Chapter 4, but when you turn the page and you go to page 92, here is the QR code. And that's what you'll be scanning that'll help you learn more about pressure canning through these videos. So it's nice. You have the written word, but you also have me here in video form walking you through the process of pressure canning. And here's the front cover of the book if you've not had a chance to see it yet. And it's all about preserving for the pantry. We cover everything: water bath canning, pressure canning, drying and dehydrating, freezing, fermenting, and pickling. And I just want to mention, in August, I'll start doing book signings in different locations, and all of that information will become available to you. But if you're not able to make one of my book signings, if you're pre-ordering the Modern Pioneer Pantry, my publisher for a limited time is going to have signed book plates that signed by me that they'll be able to send out to you. Basically, there are 3 types of pressure canners. And within those 3 types, there are lots of different brands out there. I'm just sharing with you the brands that I have, but I have no connection to any of these companies. Of the 3 types, there's a dial gauge. This is what's sitting in front of me now, and we're going to talk about in a minute. Then there's a weighted gauge. We'll talk about that next. And then sort of new on the scene are electric pressure canners, and we'll talk about those third. Now, I go into a lot of detail about pressure canners in my cookbook, The Modern Pioneer Pantry, and I'll also have a lot of detailed information on my website at marysnest.com, and I'll put links to everything in the description below. But I wanted to do this video just to give you an overview of what is available to you based on maybe what type of stove you have, what type of safety concerns you have, and so on and so forth. So let's start with this canner. This is a dial gauge canner, and mine is made by Presto. They make a lot of canners. Now, something that's important, and this applies to any pressure canner that you would buy, they all come with instruction booklets. And pressure canners can vary a little depending on the type that you buy and the brand that you buy. So it's really important to read your manual that your pressure canner comes with. Now, what are some of the pluses about using a dial gauge canner? In the case of this particular Presto, it's lightweight. It's very nice. You just have your lid here, which we'll talk about in detail in a minute, and then it comes with a rack inside that you put down on the bottom of your canner that you're going to put your jars on. And even with water, this is pretty easy to lift. Now, before picking any pressure canner, it's probably a good idea to either look on the website of your cooktop, or if you have a manual that came with your cooktop, to see what they recommend when it comes to pressure canners. But chances are, if you have a nice gas stove with those heavy sort of cast iron burners, that usually can take pretty much any pressure canner. And that's kind of my dream, to have that type of stove someday. But what I have, and some of you may have as well, is a glass top stovetop. And when it comes to glass top stovetops, you do need to be a little careful. And I highly recommend that you check with your glass top stovetop manufacturer to find out what pressure canners they're comfortable with you, or that they recommend are safe to use on your glass top cooktop. Now, for my glass top stovetop, I'm comfortable using this particular more lightweight Presto canner. Now, what about having an, what do you call it, like auxiliary or countertop cooktop? You may have seen in some of my cooking videos, I have a little Cuisinart cooktop, and it's got a nice heavyweight cast iron base. You can definitely use those. However, something you want to keep in mind when it comes to using a cooktop burner is you want to make sure that whatever pressure canner you're using sits very safely and securely on that stovetop burner, or on that countertop, I should say, countertop burner. If it fits securely and it's not going to wobble, you know, safety first when it comes to any type of home canning, then that can work for you also. And I have canned using my countertop burner, and it's worked fine. I keep it very secure. You want to make sure the countertop that you've got your countertop burner on is safe and steady, and that you test to make sure that your canner also sits on it comfortably and safely. So if you have a glass top stovetop and you have a countertop burner that's steady and secure and can handle a pressure canner, you have some options available to you. But I like to just have one pressure canner that I can rely on, that I can use both on my glass top stovetop and on my countertop burner. And that's why I find these lighter weight, which you'll understand why I'm talking about weight in a minute when we move on to talking about dial gauge canners. But that's why I like these lightweight canners, these lightweight pressure canners, because you have some options available to you as to what type of burner you can use them on. But again, I always recommend, when it comes to glass top stovetops, just check with your manufacturer. And I know some of you tell me that I'm overly cautious, and I know you'll probably mention it in the comments below, but that is true. I am probably overly cautious, but I always like to be very clear with folks who may have glass top stovetops, because I never want to advise you to do anything that may cause damage to your stovetop. So check with your manufacturer and then proceed ahead from there. So let's take a second to talk about the dial gauge pressure canner, and specifically this dial gauge. What this dial gauge helps you with is for you to know that you're maintaining the proper pressure in your pressure canner for your altitude when you're pressure canning a low acid food. And what some may consider a drawback is that you need to keep an eye on this to make sure that you are always maintaining the proper pressure for your altitude. Now, if you've seen weighted gauge canners, you may be thinking that this looks like a weighted gauge, but it is not. It's simply covering the vent pipe, and that's it. That's its job. So if you're doing other jobs in your kitchen, and you can keep an eye on your dial gauge to make sure you're maintaining the proper pressure while you're pressure canning your low acid foods, this can work very well for you. But what if you like the idea of a weighted gauge that basically, in essence, jiggles, and you don't necessarily have to have eyes on it, you just have to have an ear on it? One thing that you do need to be aware of with a dial gauge pressure canner is that you do want to make sure that your dial gauge is always functioning properly. So every year or two, it's a good idea to make sure that this can be calibrated for you at the type of stores that do that type of calibration. And what are these stores that may calibrate this for you? Often farm stores can do this for you. And also if you have a local extension, an agricultural extension service in your area, they may be able to help you as well. So now let's move on and talk about weighted gauge pressure canners. Well, now what I've got here are the weighted gauge pressure canners. Now, this one is made by Presto the same way my dial gauge canner was made by Presto. And these are very common. You'll often see these in the big box stores. They're usually where they sell the canning jars, and they're usually on the lower shelf. And so they're easy to find. As I said, they're lightweight, and you have a choice of a dial gauge or a weighted gauge. And the nice thing is if you're new to pressure canning, but it's something you really want to try, these are relatively affordable. And this is the All-American pressure canner. This is also very popular. It's very heavy though. I think this is the smallest one they make, and oh, I can barely lift it, and it's empty. But this will probably last a lifetime and beyond. So I think that's why a lot of folks like the All-American. And even though it's what I'm showing you, has the stainless steel color, they now make the All-American in a lot of different colors, which a lot of people find fun. Now this particular pressure canner with the weighted gauge, I'm comfortable using this, on my glass top cooktop. This I'm a little more hesitant about. Now, on the All-American website, it does say that their smallest canner, this one, can be used on a glass top stovetop, but I think they also do add a caveat that you still may want to check with your glass top stovetop manufacturer. Now, the difference between these weighted gauge pressure canners versus the dial gauge pressure canner is that they both have these weighted gauges, and a lot of people will call them jigglers. And according to your manual that'll come with your pressure canner, it will explain two things. Number one, how to adjust the jiggler, the weighted gauge, for your correct altitude, which will be specified in the recipe. And everyone has different, as I said, different manufacturers present these weighted gauges in different ways. They're manufactured in different ways. In the case of this particular model, whoops, of course I dropped it. Good news is it went in my apron pocket. Okay. So in this case, I'm just unscrewing that, and then you're just going to adjust how much weight you need. You can pull these right off. As I said, you'll pull these right off based on your altitude and your recipe, and you'll know exactly how much weight you're going to need for your particular weighted gauge. Then based on your altitude, you'll know how many weights to have on your weighted gauge, and then you're going to follow your recipe and your manual that came with your pressure canner that will explain to you how many times you should be hearing this jiggle over the course of a certain period of time. And if you're not sure about your altitude, that's something that's very easy to find on the internet today, or you can even give your agricultural extension service a call and they'll let you know. Now, although this does have what looks like a dial gauge on it, this is not what you're focusing on. You're focusing on your weighted gauge. This is simply informational. Now, another feature about the All-American that I want to focus on that is different if you maybe have a Presto or a similar pressure canner like this, in that These are basically just you're going to put the lid on and then you're going to lock it in place by a twist. Now, unlike a lot of pressure canners that you may be used to seeing, like the Presto, the All-American has a very unusual feature in terms of locking the lid in place. But first, let's take a minute to talk about the Presto, and this would apply to the dial gauge that I showed you earlier or the weighted gauge. You're basically going to line up the lid, and they make this very self-explanatory. They have some markings on here that are on the lid and that are on the handle. You simply line them up. Now I'm going to stand up so I might be out of the frame. I'm going to stand up to lock this in place, but I want to show you how it's relatively easy. You do need a little strength, but basically you're just going to turn it like that, and it's locked, and you're all set. Now, locking the All-American in place is a little different, but I'm going to show you a trick that's going to make this easy for you. Now, I'm going to stand up to do this one too, but the trick that I want to share with you is that as you move these bolts up, this is how you're going to be locking this in place. You want to do opposite ends, because that's going to make this process, or this lid, I should say, attached to the base of the canner very even and secure. If you try to go clockwise or counterclockwise, whatever the case may be, it does make the job more difficult. So what you're going to do is you're going to take your little wing nut here, and then you'll just pull it right into place. You're going to line up the two openings between the lid and the can, and the ones that are on the canner. You're just going to pull your wing nut up, and then you're going to go to the opposite side. It looks exactly like this front side, and you're going to pull up your other wing nut. I'm going to move this so maybe you can see. See, I just did the same thing on the back side. Then you're just going to start tightening these. And so you're just going to tighten and make them very secure. And then you're going to continue on, again, doing opposite sides. And then you'll have your canner sealed. Now, this does come with an instruction booklet, just like the Prestos and all the other pressure canners out there. They do come with booklets that are going to explain the proper process and how tight and so on and so forth for doing this. But I hope seeing this sort of in real time in this video helps you with understanding that working your way crosswise rather than clockwise or counterclockwise is probably an easier way to do this. So far, we've reviewed dial gauge pressure canners and weighted gauge pressure canners. Now, before we move on to the third type of pressure canner, I just want to take a minute to talk about the National Center for Home Food Preservation. The National Center for Home Food Preservation has a wonderful website that can help you on your home canning journey, both for water bath canning and pressure canning. And when this National Center had a test kitchen in operation, they used a variety of pressure canners to test their recipes. And although they don't recommend particular brand names of pressure canners, they do provide you with information in their recipes for using pressure canners that are both dial gauge and weighted gauge. Now, as we move on to the third type of pressure canner, and an electric pressure canner, it has not been tested in the test kitchens of the National Center for Home Food Preservation. However, other companies like the Presto, who does make an electric pressured canner, has tested it according to the same protocols in a sense that the National Center for Home Food Preservation would have used. So it is considered to be appropriate to use as a pressure canner. But I just wanted to let you know that it's not the type of pressure canner that had been used when the test kitchens at the National Center for Home Food Preservation was active. But the good news is that many of the manufacturers of electric pressure canners, did follow the various steps that the National Center would have followed. And there are also numerous videos on YouTube, which I'll be sure to share with you in the blog post that'll correspond with this video, where people who have scientific backgrounds and the proper equipment to test these type of pressure canners walk you through the steps of what they did and why they feel the electric pressure canners are safe to use. And something that I've heard from many home canners is that they really like moving to using electric pressure canners for a variety of reasons. Number one, ease of just having something that in many ways is somewhat similar to an Instant Pot, if you use that, but yet is a pressure canner, not a pressure cooker. And I've heard from mothers with young children that they feel very comfortable using an electric pressure canner because they feel that it's safe. But these are personal opinions. However, that said, many home canners do like to have a variety of pressure canners. They may have a dial gauge, they may have a weighted gauge, and they may also have an electric pressure canner. They feel having different pressure canners available to them to use during canning season just simply provides them with options. So which pressure canner is going to be right for you is going to depend on what type of stove you have, what type of style you find that you're comfortable with pressure canning, something you keep an eye on, something you listen to, or something you simply plug in. And again, what type of stovetop do you have? So that said, let's move on and look at an electric pressure canner and see what it's all about. Now let's talk about an electric pressure canner. Proper name, digital pressure canner. Now the obvious difference, but the biggest difference between this digital pressure canner, or as I refer to it as an electric pressure canner, and electric being the key word, is that both the dial gauge and the weighted gauge canners that I showed you before do not require any electricity. This does require an outlet to be plugged into. So this is great when you have electricity and you have it on a regular basis. This can be a very handy pressure canner. But as I shared earlier, many home canners do like the option of having pressure canners that they can rely on when they don't have electricity, or for some people who live off-grid, and so on and so forth. However, the digital pressure canner, electric pressure canner, is growing in popularity. However, that said, it's very important that if you decide to get a digital pressure canner, that you really read and rely on the manual that it comes with. And many also include a cheat sheet like this. Now, just like with the dial gauge pressure canners and the weighted gauge pressure canners, each manufacturer may have some different aspects. Basically, they're similar, but they may have some different aspects to the particular type of canner. And the same is probably true when it comes to these electric or digital canners. The one I have is made by Presto. Again, I have no connection to Presto or any of these companies. However, that said, I have a Presto canner because I'm familiar with that brand, and so this is the one that I'm going to be showing to you. However, again, as I said, whatever electric/digital pressure canner you buy, rely on your manual and the cheat sheet if it comes with one. Now I'm going to stand up to show you some of the things on this particular type of pressure canner, so I may be out of screen, but I think that it's important that I stand up to show you exactly how this works. What's interesting about an electric or / digital pressure canner is that if you are used to working with an Instant Pot, you will find there are some similarities. Now, number one, something that you're going to do with a digital pressure canner versus if you are used to using an Instant Pot, you're going to actually have to pull off this little regulator. And what I want to share with you is that this does take a fairly good yank to get off. So don't think that you're breaking anything. You just need to be firm with it, and then you're going to pull it off like that. And you're going to set this aside because you're not going to need this till later. And this is all very similar as it is with other pressure canners, both a weighted gauge and a dial gauge, that at some point there's going to be steam that's going to be allowed to come out of this, and then at some point later you're going to be told to put this back on. Now to open this, you're simply going to take this piece here, and it says open with an arrow, and you're going to turn it, and then you're going to lift it up, and then very similar to like an Instant Pot, you're going to turn your lid and you're going to open it. And if you're used to using an Instant Pot or other type of electric pressure cooker, you'll find that this is very familiar, the rubber seal. The only difference is, rather than tucking it in under the lid, you have a frame that's keeping it in place. Now inside you're going to have your plug you're going to be plugging into an electrical outlet, and then you're also going to have a rack that fits into this particular type of pressure canner. Now, something that's a little different is, what exactly is your rack fitting into? Well, again, if you're used to pressure cookers, electric pressure cookers like the Instant Pot, this has an actual pot that goes into your pressure canner. And your heating element is down on the bottom, very similar to electric pressure cookers. So you'll go ahead and you'll have your insert, you'll have your rack, you'll put your jars in. Everything is explained to you in your manual as to how the process should be done and completed. And then basically you'll be following your recipe and setting the dials in the front, which will have a digital readout. You're going to set your dials to how long your particular recipe needs to be pressure canned, and you're all set. And your cheat sheet will walk you through the whole process of warming your jars, filling your jars, getting your jars into the electric pressure cooker, closing the lid, locking it into place, when to put your gauge on, and when to set it to can. And this is recommended at this point when you're ready to put this piece on. This is going to be hot, and so they recommend using some type of pot holder or, pot holder gloves, whatever you're comfortable using. And you do again need to use some firmness to get this back down. So now that we've gone over all three types of pressure canners, which type is best for you? All of these have a place in the traditional foods kitchen. It's just a matter of which one fits your lifestyle. Do you like the dial gauge because you're doing other things in your kitchen and you can keep an eye on it, and you like the fact that it's lightweight? Do you like the weighted gauge because you prefer just to be able to listen to something and not have to always be keeping an eye on something, and yet you have a choice between a lighter version or the heavier all-American version? Or do you kind of like the idea of having something that in many ways is similar to an Instant Pot, and you can kind of go ahead, put everything in your pressure cook canner, pressure canner, your electric digital pressure canner, and set it, and in a sense kind of forget it? And that's what I've been hearing from people who really like the idea of pressure canning with a digital pressure canner, that they can get everything ready, get it in the pressure canner, it's on a steady countertop, and it can just do its thing. And they don't have to think about it until it beeps and tells them it's done. So it's really just a matter of what you're comfortable with. And maybe you want to have a variety of pressure canners because you want to be prepared for those times when maybe you don't have electricity or you don't want to use electricity, but you also want to have the ease of having a pressure canner that does use electricity. So these are all the things for you to consider: your stovetop, your time, the type of traditional foods kitchen you run, and whether you want to be free and not have to worry about electricity, or you're okay with knowing that you have to plug this in, but yet it's pretty easy once you plug it in and set it. So I hope that this has been interesting and helpful to you. And now be sure to subscribe if you're not subscribed to Mary's Nest here on YouTube, so that you'll be notified when I come out with part 2 and part 3 in this series of videos on pressure canning. And in the meantime, if you want to watch some videos about water bath canning, be sure to click on this video over here, where I have a whole curated playlist with a variety of foods that you can water bath can. And I'll see you over there in my Texas Hill Country kitchen. Love and God bless.